Now, the DA has called for a lift on the ban on importing second-hand vehicles to South Africa. This intended to lead to the introduction of cheaper cars than the maintenance of expensive local production facilities. However, motor industry leaders don't seem to be on board. David Furlonger, editor-at-large for Financial Mail, joins us now to unpack what this decision would mean for the industry. Thank you so much for your time, David. Are we just being subjected to election noise, all in the name of easy wins?
Far be it from me to suggest that politicians would go for cheap points just before an election. But it is a point that really, to me, doesn't make much sense. We have cheap used cars here already, plenty of them, used on the basis that the local cars, which you buy brand new, then go into the used market. So I'm not quite sure where the logic of this is. And then, of course, we take it a stage further that if we look at what's happening in the rest of Africa, we are currently trying to persuade most of Africa to stop the import of cheap used cars because it's destroying the whole African motor industry. So I'm not sure really where this idea has come from.
There's a very specific reason, David, that we here in South Africa don't allow the import of, cheap used cars. Let's talk about those decisions and what also, we're trying to safeguard ourselves against.
Look, you can import some used cars, but it's very limited. If you're a classic car collector, you can bring the cars in. If you're a foreign diplomat, you can bring your car in. And if you're a returning resident, you can bring your car in. We also have quite a thriving industry, unfortunately, for illegally imported used cars. It's estimated there are about 500,000 illegal imported used cars on the roads at the moment. They come in through Durban. They're supposed to go to neighbouring countries which don't have the same controls as we do, but they sort of disappear into the local market. So there's a lot of those there, and they reckon between 55 and 60,000 add to this number every year. So we're probably well over 500,000 already. But, like I said, if one looks at the industry here, we, in South Africa alone, we are responsible for over half of all new car sales in the whole of the continent. If I may give you an example of what could happen, Nigeria a few years ago tried to implement its own motor industry manufacturing policy. It followed the South African route, but then it changed its mind and it decided to allow the import of cars again, or rather it didn't stop them. So last year, Nigeria, with a population 3 times that of South Africa, sold a grand total of 13,000 new vehicles out of a total market of about 750,000. We simply can't afford to go there with our motor industry.
All right, David, we've been looking at this from the perspective of the manufacturers, but also let's take a look at the impact on the consumers. If we allow this flood of second-hand vehicles to be imported to South Africa, what kind of risk does this put on the consumer? Would it be a case of short-term gain for long-term pain?
Look, to be fair, the politicians did say that there should be a time limit on the age of vehicles coming into the market. And they would effectively have to come from the UK, Japan and Australia, because clearly they have to be right-hand drive vehicles.
Okay.
And in those markets, you're probably looking at vehicles 3-4 years old. But you've got a couple of catches. Mm-hmm. They won't always come with a service history. And some of the models they have in those markets do not equate with here. So, for example, here we'll have a 1.1, a 1.3 and a 1.5 litre engine. Other markets, they could come in at 1.6, less than a litre. So we would have to be very, very cautious. Yes, you would get very good deals, but I'm not sure that the risks that would be inherent would make up for what would not be a huge price advantage.
Another interesting one, I guess, for the consumer perspective here, David, is when you bring in these used imports, would we have the necessary, maintenance parts for them? Is that something that could be just fall into the kinds of systems and processes that we already have in place? Or some of these vehicles, from a consumer perspective, be a risk in that regard?
That's an interesting question, because if we look over the last 3 or 4 years, certainly the franchised dealers would not be terribly keen on repairing or maintaining vehicles from overseas. But we have a lot of independent dealers, and legislation came in 2021, which gave them greater opportunity to look after, to service and maintain vehicles. They haven't had the opportunities they might have done. So I think they would leap at the opportunity to get more maintenance from here. But again, as consumers, but personally, I would not be buying a 3, 4, 5-year-old vehicle from Japan or Australia. I'm British, so of course I'd buy anything from there because I trust them implicitly.
30 seconds left, David. Just a quick viewpoint from you. I know you are not a politician, but I mean, with the DA calling for this, could they then be shooting themselves in the foot, scoring an own goal by basically talking up against the automotive industry and its prospects in South Africa right before an election?
I don't think they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, or I don't think they have done. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think most people take most politicians' promises seriously at this time, just before an election. I just personally think it's a silly idea, but then all political parties are coming out with silly ideas at the moment.
Thank you so much for that, David. Always a pleasure chatting to you. That was Editor-at-Large for Financial Mail, David Furlonger.